right, thanks for tuning in to the R-Lads Football Network, the OFN today. It is a Monday afternoon, and unfortunately, it's not a great day for Florida State football fans, and I generally believe this is not a good day for college football fans. But I have said this for many years, especially if you've been with me for a long time. I have repeatedly talked about how college football is my favorite sport until the regular season ends. I've said it repeatedly, and I always have to remind everybody about that at this time of year, and now you know why. Hopefully next season that'll change, because for the first time, I'm not going to have to worry about all this political nonsense. And the reason why college football is not my favorite sport once the regular season ends is because it gets political. And it's exactly what happened to Florida State. Things got political. And they got the short end of the stick. Now, I understand everybody out there believing and understand. And look, rightfully so. The SEC is the best conference in college football. It has been for many years. There's no doubting that. But I think also we knew in the beginning of the season this was going to be a down year in college football. You know, Georgia had a lot of top players graduate the last few years. This is not the top college football team that we have seen from the previous back-to-back national champions. Just not. And obviously, based on how Alabama's played this season, this is not a Nick Saban's best. It's just not even close. So if you take that away from those two teams, then the SEC is a little bit of a downer. Now that's helped programs like Missouri, no question. But in general, it's just not really been a great big SEC season. So if you're going to have a year where the SEC is not going to have a team in the final four, this would have been it. But I understand the side of you can't have playoffs without Alabama or whatever you call this for deal thing, which I still it's hard for me to ever call this a playoffs. Next year we have a playoff system. This year it's an end one. We play 3 games. That's not a playoffs. 3 games is a playoffs. Come on. Popularity contest. It's political. And now that this system, because of the transfer portal, NIL, whatever we're going to throw in there, the fact is that the system is now. And look, I know that a lot of fans don't like the NIL or at least the transfer portal. I get it, but that's a little old school thinking. Now, they definitely have to hammer away at the guidelines to make sure that there's a little bit of self-control with the transfer portal. No doubt. Everybody knows that. As far as it's just a Wild West show and it's just too out of hand. Okay. But what happens is because of the transfer portal, because of free agency in college football, anything can happen year to year. There's more parity. That's what free agency was built for, parity. And parity makes a sport more exciting, fun, opportunistic. Anything can happen. That's the first sign this season of what is to come starting next season when we have a real playoff system. But what we're going to talk about today, 2 things. We're going to talk about how I believe Florida State got screwed. And by the way, I threw in my colors to back Florida State. Not my colors, not my team, but garnet and gold to back the Seminole program. And we're going to go FSU, Alabama. Yeah, that's what we're going to start with. Then, a little bit later on, when we're done with that, I'm going to use a website I've never used before. It's called The Lines. I don't know, maybe it'll be a new website that I use, but it just worked out perfectly because just before I was going to go in and check out all the bowls, I had no idea. All I paid attention to yesterday for the first few hours was the playoff situation and Florida State getting screwed and Florida State, Alabama, and all that kind of stuff. And then it went right into the NFL. It did not stop for me until I woke up this morning and then decided, you know what? Yeah, I know about maybe 4 other games, 4 of the bowl games, like the top games, just the games itself, but I don't know anything else other than that because they talked about it on the show yesterday, the ESPN show, the committee show. I know there are about, 30 some odd other bowl games out there that I do not know the matchups. I do not know the matchups. I do not even know the lines yet. So I was just about to get started with that. And I said, you know what? Let's just do this live. Not live, but as I get them, I'll react. So we're going to get into that next. But first, I'm going to give you my opinion on why I believe Florida State got screwed. Okay, so a few things, and this is real important to go over. Does anybody get the fact that Alabama, okay, everybody wants to talk about, like, the immediate reaction is Alabama, SEC, Nick Saban. Matter of fact, I saw some announcers talking about, oh, this vaunted Alabama defense, and, oh, this Alabama, they beat the best team in the country, two-time defending champs. First of all, they did not beat the two-time defending champs as far as the players that were on the field. They're different players, okay? Beck was not the quarterback the last 2 years with Georgia, okay? That quarterback's in Los Angeles playing for the Rams now. Okay, a lot of players in the NFL now from that Georgia team that won back-to-back national championships. Okay, it's not the same team. Matter of fact, the committee is constantly talking about the fact that, well, we don't judge teams about, how they did the year before or the year. That means nothing. It's a new year. All right, so if it's a new year, right? It's a new year and a new team. Then this is the whole reason why this is complete nonsense. There's no doubt in my mind that if you put the whole system, that example of putting, the blank team next to the profile and then the other blank team next to the profile and choose which one, no doubt in my mind, it's Florida State. But because everybody knows it's Alabama, because everybody knows Alabama is playing in the SEC. Hey, the SEC, they've had some dominant teams, and they've been the best conference in college football for the past 15 years. So we have to have a team this year in the championship game, right? No. Again, as I said before, this is a different year. You don't believe me? Let's take a look. Take a look at Alabama, okay? Did you know that the Alabama Crimson Tide have the 54th ranked offense in college football? 54th. Okay? That is pretty much right down. They're an average offensive team. Average. Okay? They have the 18th ranked defense. This is no vaunted Alabama defense. Will Anderson is not on this team. This is not the Alabama defenses of the past. This is a top 20 defense. 18th ranked defense in college football. That's all they are. Top 20 defense. I love this stat because I've known about it since early in the season. Everybody knew going into this season, Alabama was going to have a bad go of it on the offensive line. And it's happened all season long. Do you know that Alabama ranks in all of college football 125th in sacks allowed? They have given up 43 sacks this year. Alabama, this great team, has given up 43 sacks. There's only, 8 teams that have given up, or several teams that have given up more sacks than Alabama. Just a few. Teams like Nevada have given up less sacks than Alabama. Okay. Now let's talk about the schedule. Let's talk about the SEC, the mighty SEC. Alabama's schedule this year. Do you want to know that they have played 5 tough football games where you would go, okay, those are good. Those are games that you can definitely say, yes, these are the games that are going to dictate how good Alabama is. 4 of those games were at home, and 1 was in neutral territory. Alabama did not have a tough road game all season. Matter of fact, the toughest road game they had all season, Auburn, and what happened in that game, which everybody wants to forget. They completed a 4th and 30 pretty much in the last chance play of the game. 4th and 30 touchdown on the last play, basically, of the game. And this is supposed to be some great football team that deserves a chance to play in the playoffs. That is basically a loss at Auburn. That's 2 losses. And no matter what they do to Georgia, even if they beat Georgia with 2 losses, they're not playing. They are not in the championship game. They are not in the playoffs. If they would have lost that game to Auburn and everything went the same way, beat Georgia, they would not be in the championship. They would not be in the championship 4. But we're just going to forget that they needed. See, this isn't a 4th and 30 completed against Georgia. This is a 4th and 30 completed against Auburn, their toughest road game of the year. Who did they beat? Well, they beat LSU, Tennessee, and Ole Miss. Those were their home wins. And let's not forget they lost to Texas. Ole Miss, Tennessee, and LSU. Hey, they beat LSU. I know another team that beat LSU. And they beat them on a neutral site. Not a home game, a neutral site. FSU. By the way, do you know that the least amount of points that LSU scored all season against FSU? 24. Do you know that one of the Heisman favorites right now, Jaden Daniels, had 1 touchdown and 1 interception in that game? One of the Heisman favorites, 1 touchdown, 1 pick against Florida State's defense in that game. So, what else do I notice in the schedule? Oh, that's right, Georgia. They beat Georgia. Once again, it does not matter what Georgia did the previous 2 years. It does not matter that Georgia had this long winning streak. That came from a different team. They were undefeated this season. So what did Georgia do this season? What was so impressive about the Georgia Bulldogs this season? Oh, they beat Tennessee. Okay. And that was a road game. Beat Tennessee, it was a road game. Oh, by the way, did you recall that Tennessee lost to Florida? Yeah. The same Tennessee that Alabama beat at home and Georgia beat on the road, Tennessee. You know what Tennessee did? Tennessee lost to Florida. That's right. They lost to Florida in the swamp. You know who else went to the swamp this year and beat Florida? Who beat Tennessee? Florida State. That's right. Florida State. Oh, and Georgia beat Missouri. Okay, good win. But come on, dude, really? We're going to start talking about big SEC wins, Missouri? And I've been a lot, Drinkwitz backer all season. But we're not putting Missouri up there as some sort of like classy win. We're just not doing it. Even though that was their best win of the season. Because Missouri, better than Tennessee. Where was the game? At Georgia. Where all the other big games that Alabama won? At home. Except when they went to a neutral site against who? Georgia. So who did Florida State beat? Beat LSU, as I mentioned, SEC team. They also went to Clemson. You know how hard it is to win in Clemson? Yeah, Clemson didn't have a great year and all that stuff. You still think it's easy to win in Clemson? Won at Clemson. Again, went to SEC country, the swamp, beat Florida. And then they beat Louisville in a neutral site game. And everybody wants to talk about how Florida State did not look good the last couple of weeks. Wait, what? Florida State did not look good the last couple of weeks? No. The Florida State offense did not look good the last couple of weeks because they were playing with their backup quarterback. Matter of fact, they were playing with their number 3. Okay? Their defense was phenomenal. Since when is football a one-sided story? Since when do we talk about how great a team is or how deserving a team is just because they have a great offense? Since when do we not talk about defense? But everybody knows, and anybody that knows anything about football still, to this day, knows, as great as the offenses are and how important offenses are in the game, the passing game, and all that kind of stuff, everybody knows defense wins championships. And Florida State has a defense. And they proved it against Louisville. This was a Louisville team that was coming in hot. Yeah, they lost to Kentucky, but they were still having a great year. Matter of fact, I'm not sure if you realize this, but my sportsbook, Louisville, was the favorite in the game. It was about an hour before the game time, they were the favorite. Now, I'm not sure if that was at every book or the consensus, but that just also shows you Florida State went into that game, potentially, depending on which sportsbook you use, as a dog. Why? Well, why not? They're the number 3 quarterback, right? And what did they do? Not once in that game did they put themselves in a position where they were going to have to come from behind or do something that they were not capable of. Their defense, understanding all week what they needed to do in order to win that game with the number 3 quarterback, rose to the occasion. Isn't building championships all about adversity? How you deal with adversity. No team, besides maybe Washington, was a better, and Michigan. That's what was so great about having that was so great about what it could have been great about having Florida State with Washington and Michigan. The adversity that those teams dealt with. But Florida State could have been the top. Because their defense understood all week going into this game, look, they got some weapons on offense. They're not an electric offense. They're not top 20, but they're still a dangerous offense. And they dictated the football game. This Florida State defense is better than Alabama's defense. It's not, I'm sorry, but it ain't even close. And we'll talk about more draft prospects and things of that nature as we move on here on the Our-Lads Football Network with Dave Syvertson. Definitely going to get into this because we're going to talk about the top players to keep an eye on in the playoffs, but we're definitely also going to talk about this Florida State defense. I mean, how can you not have been just, I mean, Verse obviously is just going to be a beast. But Braden Fisk, I mean, that guy was awesome. I mean, throw in, you've got Patrick Payton, you got Kalen DeRoche. I mean, that you could just compare the top talent from Florida State, Alabama, pro prospects. I'm telling you right now, and I'm not Dave, but I'm telling you right now, Florida State has the edge. Okay, now you might say, yeah, but overall, depth chart and all that, that's maybe going to be different. But I'm not going to get into that because we're talking about this year's team. We're talking about the best players on Florida State versus the best players in Alabama. Defensively, Florida State has the edge. I'm not trying to sit here also and tell you Alabama doesn't have a good defense. They do. And I'm also not trying to tell you that I don't think Alabama can win the national championship because they clearly can. This is not about that. It's like when people bitch and complain about about March Madness and about which teams get in and did they deserve this or did they deserve that. And then the team that, well, I'm not even sure they should have been in the tournament. Then they go on a run. They get to the Sweet 16 or the Elite 8 or something like that. Again, it has nothing to do with what happens when the team gets in. Because once they're in, of course they can do damage. Of course they're talented enough to make noise. It's not about that. But did they deserve to be in? That's the debate. And once that debate is over, everything else is out the window. Now you have a new debate. All right, let's go. Who do you like? Alabama, Michigan, Washington, Texas. There's going to be a lot of people, and I haven't even looked at the odds yet, but I think there's going to be a lot of people who are probably going to pick Alabama to win the national championship. If there was a poll out there, I think most people would probably pick Alabama. And who knows, maybe they'll be right. But again, that's not the point. Look, this is why you have to have the playoff system we're going to have next year, because it shouldn't be the top 4 teams. Yes, right now the NFL is going through a little bit of a stretch where a lot of the top seeds are winning. But there was a time not too long ago where for about 5-10 years or so, you were getting wild card teams that were making runs to Super Bowls and winning, all sorts of lower seeded teams. Yeah, we're back to having a little bit of change, but that's the fun of it, is that you're going to have an ebb and flow when you have 16 teams. How many are? College, 12 teams. Sure, the 10th and 11th and 12 teams, maybe they're not going to have a shot. But this year, and I think every year, you're going to have a legitimate 8 teams that could have a hot streak, make a run, and win a national championship. And one of those teams, and I think if this is something that's a great point that people are going to talk about, Ohio State, Cardell Jones, 2014. Because the other thing that is just mystifying to me is about people are going, oh, Florida State's offense, look how terrible they are. You can't put a third-string quarterback in there. Look how bad it's going to look when they take on Michigan, let's just say, if you swapped Alabama and Florida State. Whoa, wait. Who said that Florida State was playing a third-string quarterback in a month? Rodemaker was this close to being able to play on Saturday night. This close. You think another 4 weeks, he's not going to be ready? So you're going to have your number 2 quarterback playing for Florida State. Not your number 3, your number 2. Okay, so that is a big difference. So you have the comparison of Cardell Jones. You want to know what Cardell Jones, his career numbers were? before he took over in the Big Ten title game and made the run. And I know that really well. You know why? Because after he did what he did, knowing Urban Meyer at the time, knowing what a great coach he was, especially as a dog, I got all behind Ohio State and told everybody Ohio State was winning the national championship. That was the team I was taking. And they were a long shot going into the playoffs, a long shot. But I could tell what was going on. I could see what was happening. I knew and trusted Urban Meyer as a dog in that situation. And I rode with him and made a lot of money and told a lot of people. Now, Cardell Jones. Do you want to know what he was? Here are Cardell Jones' career numbers. Because he played in 2013 for a tiny little bit. Played just a little bit more before the Big Ten championship game. 11 of 19 with 2 touchdowns. Okay? So in other words, we knew nothing about Cardell Jones. Nothing. So you go, all right, well, he played one game, though, before they had to make a decision on who was going to be in the playoffs. So, yeah. What did he do? All right. Against Wisconsin. Actually, taking a look at his numbers. And right now, oh, you know what I did? I scratched out his numbers specifically on point because of the fact that I had Ezekiel's Elliott's numbers in there. So I'm just going to have to find them right now. But the reason I had Zeke's information in there was obvious, okay? And we know why. And that is because he was the reason. He was the reason that Ohio State won a national championship, okay? Cardell Jones against Wisconsin in that blowout win, 59-0, was 12 of 17, 257, 3 touchdowns, no picks. Now, he completed again 12 passes, 15 yards a pass, and 3 touchdowns. That's really good. Matter of fact, that was his best game. That was his best game in that 3-game stretch. Okay? So, what did Zeke do? He had 220 and 2 touchdowns in that game. So, they get to the playoffs. And again, everybody's remembering Cardell Jones. But Cardell Jones was not the reason he won the national championship. It was Zeke. We talked about 220, 2 touchdowns in the Big Ten championship game. Well, he had 230 and 2 touchdowns in the semifinal win against Alabama, and 246 and 4 touchdowns in the championship game win against Oregon. He was the reason he won the national championship. Florida State has a pretty good running back too, by the name of Benson. Yes, he's not Zeke. I completely get that. And Ohio State did not have this dominant team. They were not like a top 10 offense or a top 10 defense. They were just a top 20 team. Sort of like Florida State and Alabama. Just top 20 team. Even more so like Florida State, because Florida State was top 20 team. Alabama, again, as I said, 54th ranked offense? That's kind of not top 20 when you're talking about statistics. But that's what Ohio State was, statistically a top 20 team. But they got hot with a great coach and made that little run. That's all it took. So what people are trying to say then is that if that Ohio State team was in this year, in this formula this year, and you had the same teams, you knew the same 3 were in, Michigan, Texas, Washington, and you had to choose between Florida State, Ohio State, and Alabama. Well, you would have chose again, Alabama. There would have been no reason to touch Ohio State against Alabama that year. And yet, what did Ohio State do? They went on, won the national championship with a backup quarterback. And this Florida State defense is better than that Ohio State defense from that season. So that's why it's important to put that out there, because there's just too much of this SEC lore, and you have to have an SEC team, even though the SEC was clearly down this year. Once again, Alabama was a 4th and 30 away from losing to a 500 team on the road. Okay? Which would have been their second loss. They played nobody on the road. Nobody. In a true road situation. Did they go somewhere in a true tough environment and have a W? They did not face any adversity. Their biggest road win was probably Texas A&M. And everybody beat them this year. Can Alabama win the national championship this year? Yes, absolutely. Matter of fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they did. It might even be my pick. Not sure yet, but they could be. That is not what we're talking about here. And for Florida State for their defense to have such a magical season. You know, the adversity that hey, lost our starting quarterback. Hey, lost our second string quarterback. But we still found a way. Hey, we've got to stuff and stifle this team. A spit comes out of my mouth. I'm so into this. We've got to do whatever we can to shut down that offense because we're not going to score much. We're just not going to drive the ball down the field very often. So our defense has got to basically put our best game forward of the season. We've got to find a way to stop this football team. And Louisville wasn't able to do basically junk for most of the game. It was an incredible, gutsy performance by that Florida State football team. Matter of fact, I picked Florida State as my top pick this past week. Talked about it on some of the shows this past week. And the reason I said it was what I'm talking about. Because I was getting so impressed by how they were winning games, by how they were able to win that Florida game, because it just, whatever came their way, whatever they had to do, because they had some close games during the season as well, but whatever they had to do, they found a way to get the job done. That's what champions do. And to not be given that chance with a second string quarterback, what are we talking about here? To not be given that chance. Just because Alabama's from an SEC, from a conference that has usually been great. Not great this year. Oh, but Alabama beat the number one team in the country. They beat Georgia. Yeah, Georgia. What'd they do this year? And we even went over some. I even skipped going over some of the close calls Georgia had this year of winning football games. I mean, really, did anybody look at... I mean, that's the thing. And when it's all said and done, chances are I'm not going to pick Alabama. Because the reason I'm not going to pick Alabama, even though, depending on what I get on the futures market, I might say, you know what, do I look at them like Ohio State? Well, no, because Ohio State was a bigger dog. Ohio State was a dog. They were a legitimate long shot. Matter of fact, I think they were like 8-1 to win the championship as in the semifinals. It might have been 8 or 10-1, which I just thought was crazy. Which is why I took it. But Alabama's not going to have that kind of number. So they're not really a dog. And again, right now the line is like 1 or 2 Michigan. I wouldn't be surprised if that line went to pick them by game time. I think there'll be a lot of people that are going to put money in Alabama. But then again, I don't know. Because even though I'm a Michigan fan, I haven't seen Michigan. I haven't seen this particular group come up with anything big in the postseason. J.J. McCarthy sure hasn't. He didn't do it last year. I'm sorry. I don't have all that faith in the world that they're going to be able to do that. Now, does Alabama have what it takes to win these next 2 games? Of course they do. But Texas-Washington, that'll be different. All right. So I just wanted to throw that out there to give you a background of details of the reason why I believe Florida State got screwed. And I've heard a lot of the experts give their opinions, and that's why I've had to I've had to debate those opinions and counter them. You have to get this thing out of the way where you have to have an SEC team. You just have to, because every league, every division, every conference, they all have down years at some point, and this is just the beginning. I'm sorry, but the SEC will not dominate. Now look, it's going to be different because you're going to have Texas and Oklahoma, and you're going to have a really crazy SEC. So the whole idea is going to be different. But there's still going to be more parity then, even in their conference. They're still going to probably end up with 3 or 4 teams in the playoffs next season. Well, probably 3. I'm not sure how that's going to work out, depending on exactly how they fix it and who gets the definite invites and all that kind of stuff. But I could see 3 SEC teams getting in every year, more than likely. So, and they're going to have better years, but overall, they're going to be beating up on each other. And let's also keep this in mind. The days of going undefeated in some of these conferences are over. But they're just over. If the schedules are legit, they're going to be over. Because if you have teams like Alabama playing Georgia, Texas, Oklahoma, and Georgia plays the same teams, and they're all playing each other. Again, every year schedule is going to be a little bit different. But I just went over the schedule. There was nothing big time about these schedules. Alabama played one out of the two teams, Alabama, Georgia. Alabama was the one that had one really tough non-conference schedule or team, and they lost to them at home. Now, we know how strange that is, but that was the whole point. The whole point of how surprised we were that Texas actually went into Alabama and beat them was that was supposed to last. That was a surprise. That's not supposed to happen. But why did it happen? It happened for a reason. It happened because the conference was down this year. And what you're saying is, it's okay. Even when they have a down year, we're still going to go ahead and give them the benefit of the doubt. Well, that is wrong. If Florida State had lost, if you were trying to battle Alabama with Georgia, or let's say Florida State with Georgia, things are different. But I'm sorry, the whole idea and the whole reason this is just a bad deal for Florida State is because they did everything they were supposed to. They faced the adversity that not many teams faced this season, especially down the stretch. They picked it up. They did what they had to do. They were an inspiring story, and in the end, politics got in the way. That's why I was really upset last year when they shunned Rutgers of being in the tournament. I really ripped into, yes, once again, the committee and the politics of it all, because and I'll just give you a quick reason why I was upset. Rutgers beat Penn State twice last year, beat them in their own building, and then when both teams were on the bubble to get into the tournament, they put Penn State in. That's all I have to tell you about how upset I was over that. And I think the same reason that they gave Penn State the nod is the same reason I think that they gave Alabama the nod. This whole thing about how the teams are playing now. Well, that is complete nonsense. It's complete nonsense. If you want to use how teams are playing now, well, that's just one of 10 other factors that you should be using. But you do not use how are teams playing now as this like 80% of how you're going to decide which team gets in, which is really what they did. Besides, of course, giving the SEC the nod, 10 out of 10 times. Anytime they're going to make that decision. And that's just wrong. Because then why play those games then, right? Why schedule that game early in the season? So now what you're telling me is not only do I have to schedule those tough games in my, every year, but I have to do it at the end of the season for it to be relevant. Because beating them, Texas or Alabama losing early in the season and then getting better, Florida State losing their quarterback and struggling offensively late, for Alabama, that means more what you're doing now than what you did before. Look, we talk about that in the NFL as just a talking point because we know there's a system. It's not politics in the NFL. It's who gets in. You got standings. You got tiebreakers. You don't have a computer. Everything's set. Everything's laid out. Everybody knows what the deal is. You don't have to sit there waiting for a committee to decide who gets in or who doesn't. Everybody knows it's a fair system. Not the case in college football, obviously. Better now. It'll be better next year. It'll be much better. And thank goodness it could not be coming at an earlier time. It could not. Thank goodness we're having the playoffs next year. A real playoff system. Thank goodness.